Life often moves forward without warning. We wake up, go through our routines, and assume tomorrow will be just another day. We never truly expect that a single moment could change everything. October 3rd, 2023, started like any other Tuesday. The soft golden rays of morning sunlight slipped through my curtains, painting streaks of warmth across my bedroom walls. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air as I moved through my usual routine. I stretched my arms, whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, and took a deep breath, ready to face the day ahead. I had always been a woman of faith, though not without struggles. Like many, I had moments of doubt, moments where the weight of the world felt unbearable. But I had always believed, that God was watching over me. My job as a caregiver at a senior living facility was more than just work. It was a calling. There was something about listening to the elderly share their stories that reminded me of the fleeting nature of life. I spent my morning tending to familiar faces, Mrs. Johnson, who never ran out of stories from her youth, and Mr. Ray, who hummed gospel hymns as I adjusted his blankets. The day passed in a blur of small, tender moments. A kind word here, a gentle touch there. I didn't realize at the time how precious those simple moments were, how I was walking through my final hours on Earth without even knowing it. By the time my shift ended, exhaustion had settled over me. My son had called earlier, his voice light with excitement as he asked me to bring home his favorite cornbread. So, before heading home, I made a quick stop at the bakery. I grabbed the warm loaf, its comforting scent filling my car, as I placed it on the passenger seat. I didn't know that would be my last act as the person I once was. As I pulled onto the familiar road leading home, light raindrops began to fall. The windshield wipers moved in slow, steady sweeps as my favorite gospel station played softly in the background. Then, out of nowhere,
Headlights.
blinding,
Fast. Coming straight at me.
my heart slammed against my chest. The truck skidded wildly across the wet pavement, heading straight for my car. I gripped the wheel, desperately trying to swerve, to move, to do something. But it was too late. The impact was violent. A deafening crash. Metal groaned, glass shattered, and my body was thrown forward with a force I had never known. And then, nothing. A darkness so deep it swallowed everything. A silence so vast, so complete, that for a moment, I thought I had simply ceased to exist. But then, something impossible happened. I realized I was still there, but I was no longer in my body. If you're still here, comment your name and city below. In our next video, we'll send you a special greeting. At first, confusion wrapped around me like a thick fog. I was aware, thinking, existing, but how? I looked down and saw the wreckage of my car. Twisted metal, shattered glass, the faint red glow of brake lights reflecting on the wet pavement. My own body, slumped and motionless behind the crumpled steering wheel. I should have panicked. I should have screamed. But I felt nothing, only an overwhelming stillness. Then, I saw her. Standing near the flashing ambulance lights, untouched by the rain, was my mother. She had been gone for 5 years. But there she was, watching everything unfold with an expression of deep peace.
She didn't speak. She didn't need to.
Her eyes met mine, and in that instant I understood. I was dead. And yet, I had never felt more alive. The weight of worry, fear, and pain had vanished. The burdens of life, the anxiety, the struggles that had once consumed my thoughts, gone. It was as if I had stepped into a new realm, outside of time itself. Then I saw the light. It wasn't coming from a single direction. It was everywhere, warm and golden, alive in a way I cannot fully explain. It called to me, not with words, but with something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of my soul. And then I heard his voice. "Dorothy, come." The moment I heard it, I knew. Jesus. His presence was overwhelming, like standing at the edge of an ocean too vast to comprehend, like being enveloped in a love so complete it reached the deepest, forgotten places of my soul. I wanted to move toward him, to step fully into that light, but before I could, I began to see. not with human eyes, but with something else, something that went beyond the physical world. And what I saw next would change everything. The moment I heard his voice, everything around me changed. I was no longer hovering above the wreckage, no longer watching my broken body being attended to by paramedics. The scene of my accident faded into nothingness, and in its place, light surrounded me, vast, golden, alive. It wasn't like sunlight. It wasn't even like any light I had ever seen before. It had depth, presence, and something even more indescribable. It was conscious. It saw me, knew me, and welcomed me like a long-lost friend. Then I saw him. Jesus. I don't have the words to fully describe him, not in a way that could ever do justice to what I saw. He wasn't just radiant, he was the radiance. His presence was the very essence of love, peace, and power, woven together in a way that filled every part of me. Looking into his eyes was like looking into eternity itself. I had expected to feel small, unworthy, terrified even, but instead I felt home. Tears streamed down my face, though I don't know if I truly had a face in that moment, or if I even had a body at all. But I felt the motion of tears, the act of breaking down in the presence of absolute love. He reached out his hand. The moment his fingers brushed mine, everything shifted. A wave of knowledge, of truth, poured into me. Not in the way we learn things on Earth, but in an instant, overwhelming, complete. And suddenly, I saw the world, not as I had known it, but as he saw it. I saw veils covering people's eyes, not physical ones, but spiritual ones. They walked through life blind to the truth, thinking they were free but bound by something unseen. The world they thought they understood was nothing but a carefully constructed illusion, a deception so deep that even those who considered themselves awake were trapped in it. The darkness wasn't just around them, it was inside them. I gasped, "Lord, what is this?" Jesus' face was filled with sorrow. "This is the world as it is now." Then he showed me something even worse. The darkness wasn't just infecting individuals, it had spread to entire nations, governments, churches. I saw politicians speaking words that were not their own, controlled by something greater and darker. I saw pastors standing on pulpits, preaching messages that had been diluted, twisted, stripped of power. They thought they were leading people to truth, but they were only deepening the deception. I saw families divided, torn apart by forces they couldn't even name. Arguments over race, politics, money, none of it was what it seemed. It had all been carefully orchestrated, a strategy of an enemy that operated in shadows. Then Jesus showed me the enemy. It wasn't just one being, but many. A force that had slithered its way into every part of life, feeding off fear, off anger, off confusion. And worst of all, people didn't even realize they were part of it. I turned to Jesus, tears spilling down my face. "Lord, what can be done? How can they be freed?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something besides sorrow in his eyes. "Hope. There is more you must see," he said. And with that, the world around me shifted again. One moment, I was standing beside Jesus, looking at the world from above. The next, I was inside it. I stood on a busy city street. The sun shone brightly overhead, and people moved in every direction, shopping, working, laughing, scrolling through their phones. It looked normal, but then I noticed something horrifying. No one was truly interacting with each other. They weren't speaking, weren't looking up. Their eyes were locked onto small glowing devices implanted beneath their skin. I turned to Jesus in shock. "Lord, what is this?" "This is what comes next," he said. As I watched, a large screen on one of the buildings flickered to life. A charismatic leader appeared, smiling, speaking with warmth and confidence. People stopped in their tracks, their faces filled with adoration, their bodies relaxing into an unnatural stillness. "This is the one they will follow," Jesus said. "The one they will trust. The one they will surrender to." I watched in growing horror as people stepped forward, one by one, to receive something in their hands. At first, I thought it was a simple upgrade, some new form of identification or technology. But as I looked closer, I realized what it truly was: a mark. Not just a physical one, but a spiritual one. It bound them, tied them to something they could not see. I turned to Jesus. My voice was barely a whisper. "Lord, is this the mark?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But this is how they will accept it. Slowly, step by step. First, it will be about convenience. Then, it will be necessary. Finally, it will be mandatory." Tears blurred my vision. "Why can't they see it?" "Because they do not seek me," Jesus said. "Because they trust the world's wisdom over mine." I wanted to scream, to grab the people and shake them awake, to make them see what was happening. But they couldn't hear me. They were too entrenched, too comfortable in their deception. Then Jesus showed me something even more painful. I saw division, not just in nations, but between people of faith. I saw Christians arguing, fighting each other instead of uniting. And I realized this too was part of the deception. "Do you see?" Jesus said. "The enemy does not need to destroy my people. He only needs to divide them." I fell to my knees, my soul breaking at the weight of what I had seen. "Lord, what can we do?" Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch filled me with strength, with urgency. "Tell them the truth, Dorothy. Some will listen, some will not. But the truth must be spoken." The vision around me began to fade. I felt something pulling me back to the physical world. "No," I whispered. "I don't want to leave. I want to stay with you." Jesus smiled, but his expression was serious. "Your time is not yet finished. You must warn them. You must tell them what is coming." A sudden force ripped me away from the light. And then, I gasped. Air filled my lungs. I was back. I was alive. I had returned to my body. The hospital room was dim, the rhythmic beeping of machines filling the silence. My chest ached with each breath, and my vision was blurry. But even through the haze of pain, one thing remained crystal clear. Everything I had seen was real. I had stood before Jesus. I had seen the deception that was spreading across the world, the spiritual chains binding people, the future that was unfolding right before humanity's eyes. And now I had been sent back.
But why?
My family was gathered around me, their faces pale and wet with tears. My sister was gripping my hand so tightly it hurt, whispering my name over and over. "You were gone," she choked. The doctors said there was no way. Her voice trembled into silence, as if saying it aloud would undo the miracle. But I didn't have time to process their shock or their relief, because the weight of what I had seen was pressing down on me like a tidal wave. I had to tell them. I had to tell everyone. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my body weak. My lips barely moved, but I forced the words out. "I saw him." My sister leaned closer. "Saw who?" I struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through my ribs. "Jesus." Silence. A heaviness filled the room, thick and suffocating. Some of them looked at me with awe, others with hesitation. Finally, my brother cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "Dorothy, you were in a coma. The brain can." No, my voice was stronger now. I gripped his wrist, locking eyes with him. I was dead. I left my body. I saw what's coming. I began to speak, pouring out everything I had witnessed. The deception, the darkness cloaking the world, the mark that people would accept willingly, the leader who would rise and control them. At first, they listened, but as I spoke, I saw something familiar creeping into their expressions: doubt. My brother's smile faded into something distant. My sister squeezed my hand, but said nothing. Even my mother, a woman of deep faith, glanced at the others with uncertainty. "You went through something traumatic," my brother finally said. "The mind can create." I slammed my fist against the bed, frustration surging through me. "I am telling you the truth." Still, they hesitated. And then I heard his voice. Not out loud, but inside my soul. "Some will listen. Some will not." Tears burned my eyes as I realized that no matter how clearly I spoke, no matter how desperate I was for them to wake up, some people would refuse to see the truth until it was too late. And that terrified me more than anything. Days passed. My body healed, but my soul ached with a burden I could not shake. I had been given knowledge, a mission, but no one was listening. At first, I tried telling people gently, hoping they would accept it with open hearts. Some dismissed me immediately, brushing it off as a hallucination. Others listened, but their eyes held that polite, distant look, the one people give when they don't want to offend you, but don't believe a word you're saying. And then something strange started happening. People began to avoid me. Friends stopped calling. Family members shifted uncomfortably whenever I brought up my experience. Even my church, the very place where I thought people would understand, warned me to be careful not to cause unnecessary panic. I wanted to scream. Hadn't Jesus himself told me that the world was blind? Hadn't he shown me how the enemy was twisting reality, keeping people trapped in spiritual deception? And yet, no one wanted to hear it. But even as the people around me turned away, I began to notice something else. There were others who had seen it too. At first, it was small. A woman at the grocery store whispered that she had dreams of a coming deception. A man at my church, one of the few who actually listened, confessed that he had felt something shifting in the world, something he couldn't quite explain. And then I found them. Scattered voices, ordinary people from different walks of life, but all saying the same thing. They had seen the deception too. They had felt the urgency. And they knew we were running out of time. Jesus had shown me something before sending me back. A vision of his warriors. Not soldiers with weapons, not people with power in the world's eyes, but ordinary men and women, shining with a light that the darkness could not extinguish. They were few, but they were awake. And they had been chosen for this moment. The world had already begun to divide. The great separation had started. On one side, those who embraced the deception, whether out of ignorance or fear. Those who would follow the system without question, who would accept what was given to them without realizing the chains it carried. On the other side, those who would stand, not by force, not by violence, but by truth.
I realized something then.
Jesus never said that everyone would listen, but he had told me that those who were his would recognize his voice. They would know the truth, even if the world called them crazy. I was not alone, and if you're reading this right now, neither are you. The world was already changing. As I sat alone in my small living room, staring at the flickering glow of the lamp beside me, I could feel it in my soul. It was not something that could be explained in simple words. It was a shifting, a quickening, like the last deep breath before a storm. I had tried to warn them. I had spoken to my family, my friends, even my church. Some had nodded politely. Others had outright dismissed me. The worst had been the ones who told me, with a forced smile, "You're thinking too much about this, Dorothy. Just focus on your healing." My healing? Did they not understand that I had already been healed? I had been dead. My soul had left my body, and I had stood in the presence of Jesus Christ himself. He had shown me the deception. He had revealed to me what was coming. And now I was here, alive, breathing, for a reason. But no one wanted to hear it. I let out a slow breath, staring down at my hands that still trembled when I thought of what I had seen. Jesus had told me that some would listen and some would not. He had warned me that the world had chosen its comfort over truth. But he had also told me something else. Those who are mine will hear my voice. And I had begun to find them. The others. It started as a whisper. A woman in a store, a man in a church pew, a stranger online. People who had felt what I had felt, people who had seen glimpses of what was coming. And they were all saying the same thing. Something is happening. People dismissed them, too. Called them paranoid, fanatical, conspiracy theorists. But I recognized them for what they were. The ones who were awake. And I knew that Jesus had shown me the truth so that I could help them see it more clearly. Because the deception was growing stronger. And time was running out. The world as it will be. I turned on the news that night, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see how much had already begun. And I saw it. It was everywhere. Not in some grand, obvious way, not like a dictator suddenly rising to power overnight.
No.
That's not how deception works. It was in the small things. A new system of digital identification being praised as the solution for a safer society. A government proposal to move toward cashless transactions to prevent fraud and crime. New technology being tested, tiny implants under the skin, allowing people to make purchases, open doors, access their medical records with a single wave of their hand. And the people? They welcomed it. I watched a smiling news anchor explain how convenient, how helpful it would be. I watched people line up to try it, excitement in their eyes as they received their upgrade. They had no idea what they were doing. They had no idea what they were accepting. I could still hear Jesus' voice echoing in my soul. First, they will make it convenient. Then, they will make it necessary. And finally, they will make it mandatory. Tears blurred my vision. It was happening. The very thing he had shown me, it was already beginning. And the worst part? No one even saw it. The two paths. I turned off the television and closed my eyes. And suddenly I was back there. Not in my living room, but in the vision Jesus had shown me. I stood at a crossroads.
Two paths stretched out before me.
The first was wide, smooth, easy. People walked down it without hesitation, laughing, chatting, completely unaware of what lay ahead. But as I followed the path with my eyes, I saw where it led. Darkness. A gaping chasm. A void that swallowed everything in its path. And yet they kept walking.
Smiling. Blind.
I turned to the second path. It was narrow, uneven, filled with obstacles. The people walking this path struggled. Some of them fell, but they always got back up. And at the end of it, I saw him. Jesus. His arms open, his eyes filled with love. I turned to look back at the wide path, my heart breaking. Couldn't they see? Couldn't they feel where they were going? I tried to call out to them.
Tried to warn them.
Some glanced at me, curious, but shook their heads and kept walking. Others laughed. And then a few stopped. Their eyes met mine, uncertain, hesitant. And one by one, they turned away from the wide road and stepped onto the narrow path. It wasn't easy. Some of them stumbled. Some of them hesitated. But they chose it. And when they reached the end, when they reached him, he embraced them. And then I understood. Not everyone would listen. Not everyone would be saved. But those who heard his voice, those who recognized the truth, they would find their way to him. The final choice. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding. I knew what I had to do. I had been sent back to tell the truth, to warn those who would listen, because time was running out, because the world was already shifting, because the deception was growing stronger every day. I don't care if they call me crazy. I don't care if they ignore me. I have to tell them. And if you're reading this now, if you've made it this far, then you were meant to hear this. This is your moment. This is your choice. The world is walking blindly toward its end. Will you follow? Or will you stand? Jesus showed me the truth. He showed me what is coming. Now, it's up to you. Which path will you take? If you've made it this far, you were meant to hear this. Keep watching. Our next video will reveal even more of what's coming. Click now and don't miss what's next.